The Dharma, incomparably profound and exquisite, is rarely met with even in hundreds of thousands of millions of kalpas. We now can see it, hear it, accept and hold it. May we realize the deep true mind of Tathagata. Good afternoon. Roshi is under the weather this afternoon, so we can talk a little bit more today about things that can be helpful for practice. I've been practicing for a really long time, and I've made every mistake multiple times, I think. I'm sure there are mistakes I haven't made yet, or mistakes I'm making now that I will then realize in the future. But at the moment, as of this point, I've made a lot of mistakes, which might be helpful to others to hear about. And today there's a great quote I think would be nice to start with. It was quoted in the Shambhala Sun in September 2002, and Roshi found it. There was no author quoted at the time, so if there is an author, hopefully at some point that'll be known. But at this moment, we don't know who it was. But somebody said, the construction of who we believe we are, what the world is like, and how we should behave is an ongoing exercise that we are undertaking all the time. We are not spectators who have simply been thrown into a world that is pre-made or pre-given. We are participants in a continuous project of constructing and reconstructing the world in which we live. I always find it helpful to hear things a second time, so I'll say it again. The construction of who we believe we are, what the world is like, and how we should behave is an ongoing exercise that we are undertaking all the time. We are not spectators who have simply been thrown into a world that is pre-made or pre-given. We are participants in a continuous project of constructing and reconstructing the world in which we live. So we really do create our experiences. It's not always clear that we're doing that, but the deeper we go and practice, the more apparent it can become, I think, at least in my experience, that's been true. Oftentimes we have a negative view of the world or of ourselves. It seems to be a cultural phenomenon, and there's some neurobiology behind it as well. There can be a negative bias that we experience, and as you know, the world, hopefully it won't become more intense, but it certainly has been more intense the last few years. As things have become more intense, people have responded by becoming more negative, it seems. There's certainly more road rage in New Mexico. People are having a really hard time with the stress and seemingly starting to see things more negatively. And when we do that, we suffer for sure, and we draw experiences and people into our lives that reinforce that negative view. And then that in and of itself can be self-reinforcing. And during sesshin, it can be especially hard because we're practicing for long hours and developing greater awareness. And as we do that, we can see these negative slants that we're putting on things, but it doesn't come up that way. It doesn't feel that way necessarily. It can feel instead like suddenly everything is wrong. The zendo is crooked. There's too much noise. The teacher is out to get us. Somebody's breathing too loudly in the zendo. Just negative things that can come up and seem like an insurmountable obstacle, or just something that is very important to deal with, either by grumbling about it, which I've definitely been, that's something I've definitely done, or whatever, some other response. Sometimes people decide to leave sesshin because there's too much negativity is built up in the mind, and it sort of is perceived as something external, something going on in the sesshin, for example. It's rare here, but it has happened before in the past. And it can seem really frustrating when this comes up because it seems so real on the one hand. And on the other hand, we have this desire to be free. And this seems like a big, giant, immovable boulder in front of us. And I like to think about it as melting down. When there's an obstruction, whatever it is, if it's something really intense, or if it's just something that feels very real and I know it's not. Or even if you don't know, just having that sense of questioning, which is really important to have baseline anyway, can help see a way around it. So what I mean by melting is if I'm doing the breath and some delusion comes up, for me it's often, this is not a perfect breath. I've already got a slant. I'm in a delusive mind state. I better start over. That's often what comes up, which is pretty silly. But, I think we all probably have our own version of that, or something else that's in the way of doing the breath completely. And so instead of, trying to fix the breath and make it a better breath, I fully melt into that imperfection of the breath. This is not a perfect breath. This is not a perfect moment. Whatever it is, I fully feel that as I just melt into it. And as I melt into it and I extend that breath no matter what, then I extend it past a point where that problem just isn't there. It just doesn't arise anymore. And that might seem like just too easy to say because especially during sesshin, these big things come up and we can breathe all we want and it's still there. So it is something that does take time. But as we go through these days of sesshin, things transform. It gets easier. You can have glimmers at the end of the breath of something different. And just taking heart with that recognizing that the process is working and that there will be more freedom as you go in practice. And I've always felt that to be true, even when my practice felt just impossible, which it did for many years. I felt like I was just sort of dragging this giant rock of resistance around with me wherever I went, but I just kept carrying it until eventually I saw I didn't have to. But just persisting in that effort, even when it felt heavy and hard, there were plenty of moments where there were openings into something, not awakenings, but openings into something different, glimpses into a truth beyond that where there's freedom and easing, being able to handle stress better, being able to handle anger better or fear, whatever it was, just as I went on in the practice, even when it was hard, and it still is hard in many ways. There's always a challenge, but when it was very, very, very hard for many years, just being able to have those moments of recognition that the process is working. And I even would write them down sometimes so I'd remember when it was really hard, like, oh yes, I remember when it was really amazing and I want more of that. And that would help steer me towards something deeper, even if it took a long time. And so focusing on the positive at times, taking a break for a loving kindness meditation can really help with this process because it helps mitigate that negative bias a bit. And so, if we're really frequently in a negative mind state, which most of us are these days, whatever it is, anger, frustration, fear, sadness, apprehension, dread, there are so many adjectives for how a lot of people feel a lot of the time these days. There can be a little bit of an antidote to that with the loving kindness meditation. And that's why we do that for about 10 to 15 minutes once a day during sesshin. We take some time out of our formal practice to just focus on positive feelings and remembering when we felt positive feelings, and just helping us swim in that a little bit. There's some good neuroscience behind that. Spending 90 seconds in that feeling of whatever feels wonderful to you, oneness, safety, just feeling at home in the body, in the moment. Even if you don't feel that way in that precise moment, remembering a time when you did can be very helpful. Or using your practice to help you more fully settle into the body in a relaxed and healing way. We do some visualizations prior to the loving kindness meditation just for that reason, to help us experience something wonderful and beautiful and safe and loving within our own being, so that when we do the loving kindness meditation, we can have that power behind it. We can genuinely feel, intentions and wishes to be happy or at peace with things, free from anxiety, free from fear, free from anger, joyful, compassionate. All of those things come up naturally as we do our practice and go deeper into it. We naturally move towards living that way and behaving in ways that help others to also feel that way. And so by taking a break out of our sesshin practice to focus on these positive feelings can help erode the tendency to feel negative from another route. It doesn't mean it's a substitute for our practice, and it's not meant to disorient us from our practice or distract us from our formal practice. It's just meant to give ourselves a little internal break from negativity and really swim in something wonderful and positive. And by doing that, we can often come back to our practice, our formal practice, with a refreshed outlook, which can be very helpful in other ways too, because often in sesshin and our practice, we can sort of get into ruts almost, or habits in our practice, and feel almost mechanical with how we're approaching it. But when we take a moment to really center into our body, doing a progressive muscle relaxation, for example, and then noticing all this internal freedom, it might even change our posture a little bit. Or visualizing Hakuin's golden elixir, which I can explain later, where you visualize a wonderful elixir melting from the top of your head down, can help ground and just open to greater feelings of well-being. So when we do that, it can shift our perspective, and then we come back to the practice and we're able to have more energy and creativity in approaching the practice and approaching the koan and approaching the breath. We can have a fresher view of how to sense our way through the unknown, which is what we're doing when we're doing our Zen practice, whether it's the extended out breath or koan work, or both. Koan work involves extended breath practice as well, or susokan, as it's called in Japanese. And these are the benefits of doing the loving kindness meditation, just taking a break from the negativity for a while to lighten the load. There are other ways to do it too, but that's one of the ways that can be helpful during sesshin. Either way, ultimately, our practice is studying the experience of the moment, really melting into it, whatever it is, whether we're feeling grumpy, whether we're feeling optimistic, joyful, sad, tired, any of it, just melting into it as we deepen into the breath Roshi a couple sessions ago talked about it being like an elevator that you take down. And I like to think about it that way too, or sinking down into the depths of the ocean. As you go down, it gets very quiet. The light gets dimmer and dimmer as you go down. The turbulence at the top of the water gets further away. And the way to deepen into that ocean is to just allow everything to be as it is. All the turbulence at the top of the ocean is just turbulence, whatever it might be. And then we just sink down, extending the breath. Just riding it all the way down. Anything that comes up is just superfluous. Just increasing awareness of the breath as you extend it. As far as it'll go, without straining. Past any expectations about what it might be or not be. And then you breathe in again naturally. And then do it again. Whatever is coming up, maybe nothing is coming up. But whatever is coming up, you just allow it to be. And then you deepen in the breath. Just let it fall out. Until it won't go anymore. And then you just breathe in again naturally. So these are some things that seemed like it might be helpful today. It certainly always helps me to remember these things and to practice them. I wonder if anybody has any questions or comments. It's good sitting with everyone. We will stop the recording now and recite the 4 vows.